Let's jump right into a profoundly complex and honestly pretty socially damaging behavioral pattern that you've almost certainly encountered at some point. I'm talking about chronic victim mentality. In this explainer, we're taking some fascinating psychological research and breaking it down into structured insights you can actually use in your everyday life. We're tackling a topic today that a lot of folks are kind of hesitant to touch, but honestly, understanding it is absolutely critical for protecting your own mental well-being. We all know someone exactly like this, right? It's that person whose life is, well, always someone else's fault. No matter what goes wrong, they're the ones who were wronged the most. You try to help, you offer them endless support, but somehow it's just never quite enough. And the truly baffling part? The second you gently try to point this out, or maybe try to hold them accountable, the narrative instantly flips. Suddenly, you are the villain in their story. It's an exhausting dynamic, and it can literally leave you questioning your own reality. So here's how we're going to deconstruct this whole dynamic today. We'll start by looking at genuine versus strategic victimhood, then unpack the anatomy of victim identity, dive into the four dark functions behind it, and explore its connection to covert narcissism. After that, we'll talk about how to recognize the real-life signs, and finally, how to protect yourself. All right, let's start with section 1. Genuine versus strategic victimhood, and really understanding the distinction between the two, because this distinction is basically the vital foundation for everything else we're going to cover today. The absolute most important thing we have to do right off the bat is separate a normal response to real, objective harm from a strategic, calculated performance. Listen, situational victimhood is very real. Trauma is absolutely valid, and genuine suffering deserves immense empathy and care, for sure. But what we're analyzing right now is something entirely different. Strategic victimhood is a dark psychological tool. It happens when presenting oneself as a victim stops being about, healing from an injury, and instead becomes a mechanism used to manipulate people, avoid taking any responsibility, and just extract resources. And conflating these two things, that actually does a massive disservice to genuine victims because it allows manipulation to hide right behind the protective language of vulnerability. Moving on to section 2, the anatomy of victim identity. Let's look at the clinical framework here. What exactly is going on in the mind of someone who actually adopts this strategy? Well, researchers Gabay and Besser actually define this behavior as a stable personality trait. They call it the tendency for interpersonal victimhood, or TIV. And interestingly enough, this isn't just about someone having a string of bad luck. It's a whole identity organized around 4 distinct features. First up, there's this constant, pervasive sense of being wronged. Second is moral elitism. They genuinely believe their suffering makes them morally purer than the people who supposedly hurt them. Third, and this one is absolutely key, they have a shockingly low capacity to empathize with anyone else's pain, while demanding everyone be hyper-aware of their own. And fourth, obsessive rumination. They're just constantly replaying perceived injustices on an endless loop. So where does this come from? Victim identity often begins as a childhood survival strategy. It usually stems from early attachment disruptions where a child learns that, hey, expressing a direct need or showing strength just isn't safe. Instead, they figure out that if they present themselves as helpless and suffering, that is when they receive care. What starts out as a totally necessary adaptive survival response hardens over time. It eventually calcifies into an adult tool for control. It's like a coping mechanism that outlived its usefulness and became a weapon. That brings us to section 3, the 4 dark functions. Let's expose the why. If someone keeps doing this, it's got to be working for them, right? So what exactly does this pattern achieve? It turns out adopting the victim posture actually gives someone enormous dominance. Let's break down the 4 dark functions at play here. First is accountability evasion. Think about it. If you're always the victim, you're never the perpetrator. Any bad behavior is instantly reframed as a provoked response to what was done to them. Second is guilt transfer. They are absolute masters at reversing the emotional energy of a conversation. You bring up a valid concern, and boom, suddenly they're the victim of your cruelty for even bringing it up. Third is resource extraction. This posture reliably generates sympathy, time, and emotional labor, completely bypassing the normal human need for reciprocity. You can't ask them for anything because, well, look at how much they're already suffering. And finally, power and control. We usually associate victimhood with powerlessness, right? But this strategy lets them dictate the emotional temperature of every single room they enter. Everyone self-censors. Everyone walks on eggshells. Make no mistake, that is not powerlessness. That is pure dominance. Let's head into section 4, the covert narcissism connection, or the vulnerable dark triad. A really crucial point here is how this identity heavily overlaps with the dark triad of personality traits, specifically what researchers call covert or vulnerable narcissism. When we think of narcissism, we usually picture the grandiose type, right? The loud, arrogant person demanding admiration for how superior they are. Well, covert narcissism is a much quieter presentation, and it's organized almost entirely around victim identity. Unlike the grandiose types, covert narcissists demand exceptional care because they believe they've been uniquely punished by a cruel world. The grandiosity is absolutely still there, it's just expressed through the sheer specialness of their suffering rather than their achievements. This actually reframes narcissism in a pretty chilling way. Covert narcissism doesn't say, I am better than you. It says, I have suffered more than you. And that completely explains why it's so incredibly difficult to resist their manipulative demands. Because on the surface, the empathy they're asking for feels totally legitimate. You aren't being asked to blindly admire a raging egomaniac. You're being asked to care for someone who's in pain. It makes calling out the dynamic as manipulative incredibly tough, because if you do, you feel like an absolute monster yourself. All right, Section 5, recognizing real-life signs, your diagnostic toolkit. We really need to know how to spot this in the wild, because long-term exposure to this dynamic literally corrodes your own perception. It causes something called relational learned helplessness, which is basically where you start doubting yourself before you even open your mouth. You can actually test for this tendency for interpersonal victimhood using 3 specific markers. Step 1, look for the pattern. A genuine victim suffers distress connected to a specific harm. But a chronic victim performer, they've got a trail of stories where every single person in their past, exes, former bosses, old friends, is a pure villain. Step 2, offer a solution. If you offer a real victim a solution, they'll engage with it. But watch how a chronic victim performer will actively reject your solution. They'll find a million reasons it won't work and just keep moving the goalposts. Why? Because resolving the issue means giving up the power of their victim state. And step 3, observe for a total, complete absence of self-reflection. When every story ends with them being purely innocent and everyone else being monstrously wrong, that lack of nuance, that is highly revealing data. Finally, we arrive at Section 6, how to protect yourself and maintain your reality. For our last section, we need to talk about how you can actually handle these exhausting dynamics without feeling like you're crossing the line into cruelty. Here is a vital rule you've got to remember. Compassion does not require compliance. Let me say that again. Compassion does not require compliance. You are never required to play judge and jury on whether someone's pain is real or performed just to set a firm boundary around how they treat you. You can have deep, genuine compassion for the childhood origins of their pain without organizing your entire life around managing their victimhood. These are not contradictory positions at all. So, here are some practical self-protection strategies you can use. First off, when you're confronting them, do not get pulled into their sprawling, endless narrative. Just respond to their specific behaviors. Second, disrupt that guilt transfer. If they try to make you the bad guy for bringing up something they did wrong, calmly return to the specific issue at hand. You can say something like, I hear you're hurting, and we still need to address what happened yesterday. Third, and I know this is tough to hear, you have to accept that leaving or setting a firm boundary means you will predictably become the newest villain in their story. It is inevitable, so just expect it. And finally, document reality. Keep notes, stay connected to grounded friends, and fiercely protect your own perception of events, because they will constantly try to rewrite the truth. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to help protect your psychological reality going forward. Look closely at the relationships that are draining you the absolute most and ask yourself, are you supporting a genuine victim or are you funding a strategy? Recognizing manipulation is not the same as dismissing pain. Protecting your own reality is not cruelty, it's just survival. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.